Hi, I'm Steve Kep, co-founder of From Day One, our forum on corporate values, and we're looking forward to hosting today's webinar. Today, we'll be exploring the topic of leading with gratitude for extraordinary business results in 2021. Our sponsor today is Achievers. I'll tell you a little bit about them. Achievers' employee voice and recognition solutions bring your organization's values and strategy to life. Activate employee participation and fuel a culture of performance to experience a data-driven business results. Now, before we get started, a few quick logistical items. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand soon after the event, so you can look out for an email in about 24 hours with the link. That email will also have info on how you can get professional development credits for this session from the Society of Human Resource Management. And look out for a written account of the conversation on our website at fromday1.co. Now I'd like to introduce Bree Harvey from Achievers. Okay, Bree, over to you.
Thank you so much for that intro, Steve. Wow, am I ever fired up to be here. As you mentioned, I'm Brie Harvey, Employee Engagement Evangelist for Achievers, and I have the super fun job of writing and speaking about trends within employee motivation and the future of work. And today we are in for a real treat as we have two of the world's top experts about workplace culture and leadership, Dr. Natalie Baumgartner and New York Times bestselling author Chester Elton. Just for a little context, can you guys see my screen? Shake your heads if you can with your beautiful headshots. Just for a little context, Dr. Natalie has a PhD in clinical psychology and more than 20 years of experience in researching and consulting on culture and engagement. At Achievers, she is our chief workforce scientist. That is almost a mouthful. And she basically leads the research arm of Achievers, the Workforce Institute. If you haven't seen her TED Talk, you may have come across her work before, as she's a regular contributor to Forbes, Harvard Business Review, and many other publications. Dr. Natalie, thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, thank you, Bree. I think you know I'm just as excited to be here to co-collaborate with you, which you know is one of my favorite things to do, and also to shine a light on the tremendous content and the insights inside Chester's book on gratitude and on Chester himself, because he's someone who's just a deeply kindred spirit and one of my favorite people to nerd out with.
It's true. And for anyone who is possibly new to the HR realm and doesn't know Chester Elton, he has been ranked as one of the world's top organizational culture experts. If you haven't had a chance to read any of his best-selling books, such as All In, The Carrot Principle, The Best Team Wins, or Leading with Gratitude, which we'll be talking about today, then you may have come across his work as it's been published in media outlets such as NPR, The Wall Street Journal, The New York Times, and many others. He's appeared on 60 Minutes, NBC's Today, CNN, MSNBC, and so on. He is also the co-founder of The Culture Works, a global training company, and we are all so honored to be here in his presence today. Chester, thank you so much for being born and for being here.
That is probably the most enthusiastic introduction I've ever had. You know, in my family, we just don't say wow. We say wow.
Wow.
See, it spells wow. This is mom. This is wow. So thank you, Bree. What an introduction. Delighted to be here.
Well, we are wowed by your book. And yes, Debbie, the slide deck will be shared with attendees. In fact, Kristen, why don't you plop that sucker in the chat so people can follow along if they so choose. Now, the topic of today's discussion, as Natalie mentioned, couldn't be any more timely. We're going to be exploring some of the latest research that highlights the gratitude gap that exists in the workplace, why it matters, and more importantly, what are some of the top actions HR practitioners can take to fix it. All of this and more are themes of Chester's latest book called Leading with Gratitude, 8 Leadership Practices for Extraordinary Business Results, which might possibly be the the best book ever written about how to get employee recognition, right? My copy of the book is so marked up. I think I wasted like 5 highlighters on this baby. Achievers has generously given away a couple hundred copies of the book, and I know some of our friends on the line have read it or it's on their must-read list. If you haven't redeemed for your free copy of the book, please stick around to the end, because I will be expressing Achievers' gratitude for you showing up today by telling you how you can get your own copy while supplies last. And as we kind of go through the conversation, I'll have a few of my favorite like sound bites and quotes from the book. But regardless of whether you have read it or not, I promise you will be walking away from today's conversation with lots of valuable and actionable insights. So yeah, definitely check out the link that Kristen is going to be plopping in the chat. And there'll be lots of good follow-up resources. Now, we're going to get this party started with a poll that's more or less designed to give us a little snapshot of where all of you are at in your employee recognition journey. Kristen, it should be, we'll go ahead and trigger that baby. Should be popping up any second. And please keep in mind as you answer this is a no judgment zone. So your replies are, as always, totally anonymous. We want to know, how likely are the executives in your organization to agree with the following statement? Employee recognition has a critical and measurable impact on employee retention, employee engagement, and performance. Are they very likely to agree with this statement? Somewhat likely to agree? Not very likely to agree, or you're just not sure what they think. You just never talked about it. Maybe you never thought about it. You don't feel like guessing. That's fine. We will, and we're at poll 1. I think all my polls are displaying. Yeah, just poll 1. We'll go ahead and give it a few more seconds to reflect. And we're going to do a 3, 2, 1. Let's see what you have to say. What do your executives think about that? Oh, wow, we got almost 38% of decision makers would very likely agree with the statement. I love it. They've made the connection between employee engagement and retention and recognition and retention. 48% some likely to agree, and a much smaller minority not likely to agree, or I'm not sure what they think. I think that's better than what I assumed. Chester, does this surprise you?
Sorry to interrupt there. It doesn't surprise me so much. I'll tell you what's interesting, though, is our perception of, yeah, I think they think it's important. The follow-up to that is, and I'd love for you to put it in the chat box, so how do they express that? Like, how do they go about making sure that you have this wonderful culture of recognition, or we call it culture of gratitude? What are some of the ways that leaders, model that behavior? Because it's one thing that, yeah, it has a critical measuring impact on employee retention performance. I'm really interested. Okay, so how do you do that, right? How do you do that? I know we've the folks from day one. They live in Brooklyn. I lived in Brooklyn for a while. We'd always say, talk is cheap. show me what's going on here. And so the numbers don't surprise me that much, because I think perception is good. The perception is good. Now I want to say, when you get into your employee engagement surveys, do I feel like I've been valued in the last 7 days? Do I have a best friend at work? Do I trust my boss to bring he or she, critical information when I've made a mistake? Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah. It makes me wonder, Chester, so this is a great response. And we love to see that organizations are picking up on the really powerful impact that recognition has. And I'm curious what you would say to the decision makers that aren't on board yet, or to those who are, listening in today and participating, who need to gain more buy-in or stronger buy-in to really bring recognition to their organizations. would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that first off, you slaughter them with data, and nobody does that better than you, Natalie. I mean, you got great research, you got great numbers, and the case study. So, I always say, look, the numbers are great because it gives you credibility. You've got a great database. We've got over 1 million engagement surveys, over 100,000 of our, motivators assessment. I know you've got the square peg stuff, and there's lots of data, and the data is important because that gives you credibility. Right. The thing is once you've established that credibility with these leaders, now you got to tell them the story. You got to paint the picture as how it really does impact. And what is the financial impact? In Leading with Gratitude, we start the book off with one of my favorite CEOs of all time, Gary Ridge. He's the CEO of WD-40. I know you've got a can, right? That blue and yellow can with a red can, everybody's got one, right?
I have 3. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they've branched out. I love their website, thousands of uses for WD-40, not just the hinges on your door, right? Well, the point is that Gary, in the last recession, as he was starting to visit the various, facilities, people kept coming up to him and saying, "Hey, Gary, are you okay?" And he'd say, "Yeah, I'm fine." So, "No, really, Gary, are you okay?" He said, it was weird. It kept happening. So he calls his wife, gets back to the hotel, and he says, "Honey, do I look unwell? Like, do I give off a sick vibe?" And and she says, "Honey, they're not asking you, are you okay? They're asking, are we okay?" And that's where he really stepped up. And he said, that was the time I said, I'm not going to waste a good crisis. So let's invest in our people. They had good financials. They didn't have to lay anybody off. They weren't hiring. They weren't laying anybody off. He said, I wanted people to come to WD-40 and hear the good news and hope. So right from the top, he modeled it. And he said, you know what? There's a couple things have to happen in any kind of transition or crisis, whether it be a downturn in the economy, a merger acquisition, or a global pandemic, is that communication has to skyrocket. Because when there's not enough communication, and I know you'll agree with this, Natalie, and I know you've got some great stories to contribute as well, that void gets filled with rumor, innuendo, and fear. None of those are productive. And secondly, gratitude has to skyrocket because people are unsure, and there's no better way to reassure people than simple acts of gratitude. Hey, I really liked your contribution to that meeting. How are things going? Things are going well, and investing in their people. So what happened, and it continues to be an incredible story. They went from a $250 million company to now, through the pandemic, their market cap is over $3 billion. So see, that's a story that if I'm talking to an executive, and by the way, say, listen, I'll introduce you to Gary. He'd love to tell you about it, that it goes from being a nice to have to an absolute must have. Now, with that story, and that's one of my favorites, I know, Natalie, you've got a lot of, great data, more than that, great stories.
Well, I love sharing that story. It's one of my favorites. In the book, but also you and I have chatted a little bit about that. And really, when we first met, and I had an opportunity to read Leading with Gratitude, I felt like I'd come home. As you know, because you and I have wowed over this more than once. The research-driven point of view on recognition and engagement that's held by us at the Workforce Institute over many years is so clearly and powerfully aligned with these stories, with this data, with that perspective that you share in Leading with Gratitude. And as always, you're just spot on when you say that the benefits of recognition to the business are staggering, but that it's also just the right thing to do. And that's, that's why I'm in this space, because it is the right thing to do. Now, since the start of the pandemic, the Workforce Institute's been really sharply focused on understanding just how the employee experience has been altered through this unprecedented time. And although a lot has changed in terms of where and how we work, we know that some things remain fundamentally true and powerful, including the fact that for employees to be fully bought in and to do the best work of their lives, they must feel valued. They have to feel seen for who they are and for what they contribute. And at the Institute, we actually just released our 4th annual engagement and retention report, which surveyed thousands of employees. And though there are, I think, so many interesting findings, encourage you all to take a look. I wanted to share one that really struck me, and then I think is really pertinent to this conversation we're having, Chester. The percentage of employees who claim that they plan to actively seek new job opportunities is up from 2020 dramatically, despite all the uncertainty with the economy. Over 50% of employees are reporting that they have one foot out the door. And we know without a doubt that one of the single most powerful predictors of job seeking is the extent to which employees feel, or rather don't feel, appreciated. And that hasn't changed over the past decade, including during this pandemic. But one of my keep me up at night concerns, besides the 3 children in my home and pets, is that as a business arena, we still are not connecting the dots between recognition and business impact, including the loss of top talent.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it's even more dramatic as you look at generational differences, right? The younger you get, the bigger those numbers. And I love the Workforce Institute. You know, you guys, I love it when you say, and we sharply focused, because you do. I mean, this is not, hey, I asked a couple of friends and they told me that, hey, they don't like where they work. I mean, this is really rock solid data. The thing that's really interesting is we also look at, so why do people stay at their jobs? Recognition is the number one ask for employees. Now, Adrian and I, my co-author, Adrian Gostick, we had this amazing just experience. We were doing a workshop. This was just pre-COVID. And we were talking about leading with gratitude and how leaders, you know, need to step up, and peer to peer, you know, it's not just all on the leaders. And one leader said, an older gentleman said, you know, the younger generation is wearing me out. They want so much gratitude. I mean, they want like our brass band to show up because they showed up to work. You know, Bree, you'll relate to this, right? And so it was really interesting. There was a whole table of millennials right next. And so we walked over and said, well, do you agree with that? And they said, no, not at all. What we want is we want feedback. We want to know, how are we doing? How are we getting there? You know, they want coaching. They want to be a part of the team. And of course, part of that coaching is, hey, I really appreciate what you did here. We're on track. And if we make a couple of adjustments, said we're just looking for more feedback. And of course, as your research shows brilliantly, that recognition feedback, that gratitude feedback is what people remember, because it says, I'm valued. My voice is heard. And so it was one of those aha moments where all of a sudden that older leader went, oh, well, I'll give you feedback all day. And they went, thank you. Thank you. Because 65% of leaders don't want to have tough conversations with their employees, right? 65%. And yet 70% of employees say, I want more feedback. So there's this huge disconnect. Well, the positive way to bridge that is with recognition and gratitude, right?
Yeah, and we definitely have some questions later down the line talking about some of those generational nuances and the differences between recognition and praise. But one thing that I think is important to highlight is the fact that if like right now in this environment, when so many businesses have already experienced severe revenue disruptions, the last thing anyone in the world needs to deal with is an uptick in voluntary turnover or losing key talent. And the thing that blows my mind, Chester, that you address very eloquently in the book, and you kind of just touched upon it, is the fact that despite the fact there's volumes of empirical evidence clearly showing that regular recognition is the top driver of engagement, retention, and so on, there's this astounding and astronomical recognition deficit that still exists. So for all of our HR leaders on the line, like what can you tell us about the recognition gap and how to close it?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of comes back to that first polling question, right? We polled leaders and said, do you think you're above average in giving recognition and gratitude? It's almost 70% said, oh yeah, I rock this, right? Then we asked their employees and only 23% agreed. That's a huge gap. That's a huge gap, right? And so it's one of these things where I think still so many leaders, particularly in any kind of transition or crisis, they say, hey, that's soft stuff. That's nice to have. We're doing hard stuff here. We're checking the boxes. We're getting, product out the door. Talk to me about hard stuff. And then of course we come back and say, look, when you get the soft stuff right, the hard stuff gets easier. Because for all the things that you just mentioned, people are more engaged. They're more innovative. They trust their leaders more. It's really interesting. In one of our surveys, we said, how did your leader break trust with you? Because trust levels in the organization were really low. And he said, oh, it was easy. She took credit for my work. She took credit for my work. I said, yeah, I'll bet that made you want to really hit it hard the next time. She goes, yeah, no. And to your point, say, listen, everybody in the team, we're all looking. We're all looking because we don't trust that our work is safe with that leader. Isn't that fascinating? And it's simply because didn't get credit where credit was due, you know? Interesting. So
Yeah,
you got to move it from the nice to have to the must have. Go ahead, Natalie.
Well, God, that's such a poignant story. And I think when I hear that story, and you've shared that before when we've chatted, that I can really feel the emotional impact of being unseen in the workplace. And I think it's important that we all of us, those of us who love to nerd out on this topic, and those of us who are new to it, that we're really aware that that this recognition deficit, this gap, this gratitude gap, it's not getting any better, and it certainly hasn't gotten better during this pandemic. In fact, some of the data that'll be coming out in our next Workforce Institute report shows that in many industries, especially those with those essential workers, that this deficit of recognition is getting worse. And I don't think there's a simple, there's simply no question that everyone from top to bottom within organizations, we're all, like you said, experiencing stress, we're experiencing anxiety. In many cases, that recognition seems, like you said, Chester, like a nice to have, but not essential to focus on because we're in a state of survival. But the emotional toll of not being acknowledged, or of feeling like that contribution that you're making in your role doesn't matter, it's tremendous. And this systemic lack of appreciation, particularly right now, but frankly, always, it is contributing to record levels of burnout and anxiety, another topic that we talk about and that you're focused on. And I think it's important to note that has a measurable impact on culture and on employee loyalty, which is going to come home to roost when we're on the other side of this pandemic.
Yeah, no question. The end of the story for WD-40 was in 2010, when the recession was coming back, their profits skyrocketed because their people were all that more engaged, right? And it is interesting, you talk about, there's enough uncertainty out there, right? Like, am I going to have a job? Am I going to get the vaccine? Is there going to be another surge? Am I ever going to be able to travel again? Can I hug grandma? I mean, there's enough uncertainty out there already. Uncertainty about, am I adding value at the workplace? Does my boss trust me? Do I trust my boss? That's uncertainty that you don't need on top of everything else. And so, we talk about recognition. I love the slide. Most misunderstood and misapplied tools of management is that, you say, look, it's common sense. I mean, you talk to leaders, they go, of course this makes sense. It's common sense. It's uncommonly practiced, so you just want to grab them and go, okay, I know you get it. I know that intellectually you get it. So why don't you do it? Like, why don't you do it? Because you think you're really good. Your employees say, no, you're not. How are you going to bridge that gap? And that's when they back up and go, well, these younger generations just need too much recognition. You go, no, that's not it. That's not it.
Well, that's a great segue, because the good news is we're going to spend the rest of our time together exploring a few of those recognition myths that are so eloquently and beautifully laid out in the book. And we'll get to talk about some of the best field tested solutions to bridge that gap.
Yeah, and before we do, we're gonna ask our friends on the line to engage with us. Let us know what you think with our next poll question, which is, if you were to ask your managers what prevents them from recognizing their team more often, how many of your managers would likely cite, I just don't have enough time, as their excuse? Would a lot of your managers pull the I don't have the time card? Maybe half of managers claim they're strapped for time. Maybe a minority of managers are pulling that excuse, or you're just not sure and you don't feel like guessing. We'll give it a few moments for people to give their best guess. Now, I'm not a betting woman, Chester and Natalie, but I'm going to predict that like half of the people either answer one of the two things.
Well, we'll see. We'll see. I mean, I always love this question because I know what the answer is when we ask leaders. We do a lot of executive coaching, and we say, "So what's holding you back? What's holding you back from doing more?" And this is not an uncommon
No, it's
So
certainly
what is-
not. What is it? Let's see, Kristen.
The suspense is killing me.
I
Come
know.
on.
Come
on, bring
What is it? Oh, way
Maybe
more
half
than
of that is
half.
usually that.
Oh, goodness. Okay, so I guess Chester,
74%. Yeah,
yeah,
74%.
that is a pretty sizable chunk. And I hope you're ready for this 3-part question, which is what is the time myth? Why do so many leaders subscribe to it? And how can HR help people get over it?
Yeah, I do love this. And it's the answer that ticks me off more than any of the other answers, right? I just don't have time. Look, I'm doing 3 things and we're multitasking and our workforce is down and our customer, stuff is up. And, if I had the time and or the budget, right, I'd do more of it. I said, okay, let me ask you this really quick. This was the guys, we were up in Canada. They made shopping malls. And the guy was talking about, I just don't have time. I said, okay, just give me the name of one of your employees. And just for, Sally. Said, yeah, Sally doing a great job. So, oh yeah, Sally's the best. And she's incredible. I mean, she doesn't need a lot of praise because she knows she's doing a good job. I don't have to tell her. And I said, great. You never tell her she's doing a good job. Well, rarely, but she doesn't need to know. I said, great. What about when she screws up? How much time you got now? He goes, oh, I'm on that in a New York minute. You know what I mean? You've always got time for screw ups. How about making time for praise and recognition? It's really ridiculous because it takes, sometimes it's a matter of seconds. Hey, Bree, I saw what you did with that customer. That was amazing. We're known for our customer service because of employees like you. Be really specific about it. I hate the guys that wander around and say, hey, great job, everybody. Great job. They got their fingers. Hey, you, you're the best. You're the best. Tower Pizza, No, that is horrible recognition. It does take a few minutes. And again, I think as HR professionals, we've got to give them the tools and model that for them and say, look, it doesn't have to be a brass band coming and rolling out the red carpet. The guys at Yum, I love the CEO there. He had this, it cost him like $2 at the novelty shop. He had these chattering teeth. You've seen him with the little legs that walk, and it was the Walk the Talk Award. Cost him $3. And people put him on display. I mean, they frame him for this $3. And it's not the thing. It's the moment. It's the recognition. And it takes literally seconds to do it well. And of course, the more you do it, the better you get. Natalie, what would you add to all of that? Because I know you've got reams of case studies.
Yeah, well, I'm with you, Chester. I mean, I try, I want to be empathetic to the plight of the overworked more again over the past year than perhaps ever before leader. And yet I thought about this a lot over the years. I think a lot of the roadblock that exists is truly the lack of awareness or perhaps just belief in the power that a small set of meaningful words has to deeply engage us as humans. Because if we really understood that, if in our society, if we really had deep appreciation, no pun intended, for that impact, I think that there would be greater buy-in. At the Workforce Institute, we've been analyzing some of the raw data that we're collecting for our next research report, which is specifically focused on what HR leaders can do to improve the employee experience. And the number one reason provided for not delivering more recognition to employees, number one by a long shot, no guess is, you're gonna be right on it, was the perception that there simply isn't enough time. I mean, it's just, we're, over and over, right? We're seeing this finding. And to bolster that finding, when we asked what would help people to recognize more often, when we asked in this study that question, the number one response was make it easier. Make it easier for me to recognize, make it easier for me to bring it into my flow of work. So I think we're really looking at a 2-pronged shift. The first being, and you spoke to this beautifully, Chester, like to ensure that senior leaders within organizations, every leader for that matter, gets it, understands that recognition is truly a powerful productivity multiplier, not a nice to have. And then second, that we have to make it easy to incorporate recognizing into daily work activity to create a really and true powerful culture of recognition across every organization.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I couldn't agree more, Natalie. And like the two things, one, HR has the burden of helping facilitate that mindset shift so that recognition is seen as literally the most powerful way they can possibly spend their time. Chester has some interesting nuggets in the book that actually had a 10-year study where they looked at how managers were actually spending their time, and spoiler alert, there's a little RFI, room for improvement. But on that note, Natalie, like when we talk about how can HR ensure that not just leaders but employees are given the right tools and technology so that recognition is simple and easy, it kind of brings up a point that Chester talks about in the book about the rising prevalence of recognition technology to facilitate and kind of emphasize peer-to-peer recognition. So Chester, in your experience,
I'm gonna give some time to Natalie. As you can tell, I'm in the public library here.
Yeah.
And they need to come in for like 2 minutes. So I'm gonna take a little 2-minute break. This is live TV, right? This is what happens. So yeah, I'll be right there. So let me just duck out for literally 2 minutes, and I'll be right back. Thank you so much. Sorry.
No worries at all. I will start the hold music. Do, 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 JK. But really, there's this chapter, Natalie, where he talks about like the rising prevalence of, peer-to-peer recognition platforms. And like one of the quotes that I love is when he was talking about the fact that like the world is just going to be increasingly digital, remote work, hybrid teams, it's not going away. And if organizations aren't thinking right now, today, about how they can empower frontline employees to call out good work when it's being done, they're going to be left behind because managers and leaders will only continue to have less line of sight into the good work that's being done across the front lines. And Natalie, I know you've done a lot of interesting work on this about like the connection between peer-to-peer recognition and belonging and psychological safety.
Yeah, well, I think that, Bree, this is where the reality of work and the necessity of recognition really starts to hit home, because most managers, and more particularly most senior leaders, they typically simply don't have a high degree of visibility into that work that's happening across the front lines. It's our peers that we work with day in and out that know what we're each bringing to the table every single day, what that heavy lift is that's behind the result. And I believe that with that evolution that is occurring towards more hybrid and remote teams, an evolution that we don't see disappearing post-pandemic. I think that has become clear that businesses are going to have to rely even more on employees to call out the good work that's being done through a more focused and local lens. And I think that's a really critical point, because we know that recognition doesn't work unless it's frequent. And though recognition from leadership is still important, the power, the impact, the logistical feasibility of peer recognition is simply a tremendous lever that organizations have to powerfully employ. I think there's just no question.
Absolutely. And you kind of touched upon the importance of recognition frequency. We'll give Chester, buy him a few more minutes, and with our next poll. On that note, what's up, Chester? I'm glad they let you back into your room. We're just getting started on our next poll, which is: how likely are your managers to agree with the following statement? People want way too much praise these days, especially the younger generation. Chester, you kind of already gave away this answer, which is good.
I think, by the way, especially you.
I know. Especially me. I'm hungry for the praise. Would your managers, a significant percentage of them, agree that maybe people are a little recognition greedy and want too much praise these days? Maybe some would agree, some wouldn't, perhaps a mixed bag. Would most of your managers likely disagree that people don't want too much praise these days? Or are you just not sure? You don't know, you don't feel like guessing. Let's give it a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Kristen, hit us with the responses. Oh, wow. So over half is a mixed bag. Half would, half wouldn't. Chester, for the people on the line who are in some of the less privileged category of this and have managers that either like kind of subscribe to this myth, how would you respond to a leader that believes people wants too much praise these days? Is there such a thing as too much recognition?
Yeah, I mean, I love this question too, because, I ask these leaders, I go, listen, just, on a personal level, how many times did you wrap up the day and go home to your family, your spouse, your partner, and say, you know what? I couldn't get anything done today. I mean, there was so much praise and recognition. I mean, it was a cake, it was balloons, it was a plaque, it was a certificate. Nobody feels over recognized at work, like nobody. And, Natalie's Institute, I mean, come on, nobody walks home and says, you know what, if I get one more, praise and recognition, I'm going to quit, right? I'm going to start working from home or whatever it is. It's ridiculous. Gallup actually did this really cool thing in a book called How Full Is My Bucket? And they actually measured it. And they said, how many moments of recognition, praise, gratitude in a day is too much? And they said, 13 is where it kind of maxes out. 13 times. Like at number 14, it starts to tail off a little bit. Well, I defy you to find a day where you felt like you were, praised and recognized 13 times in one day. And again, I think it's a generational thing. We talk to a lot of senior leaders that have been around a long time, and they say, look, I never got it, so I'm not going to give it. And so the answer is, well, two wrongs don't make a right. Just because you didn't get it, I'll bet you would have appreciated more of it. And then bring it to a very personal level. And you say, look, in your personal life, I love this question. We do this live, and we'd say, how many of you are madly in love right now? They raise their hand. We'd pull somebody up on the stage and said, you're madly in love. Said, yeah. You happily married? Said, yeah. How long? 35 years, the guy said. Was it down in Las Vegas? I'll never forget it. I said, how many times do you tell your spouse or your partner that you love her? He said, oh, multiple times a day. I said, multiple times a day. So literally hundreds, if not thousands of times a year. He goes, oh yeah, absolutely. I go, that's too much. That's way too much. Are you kidding me? Wouldn't it be better if just like on Valentine's Day, maybe your birthday, maybe your anniversary, just, limit it once a quarter? Or how about just a year-end banquet? Let's wrap it all up in the year-end banquet. Wouldn't that be better? And of course, they said, well, that would be ridiculous. And I said, yeah. And that's the same answer when you think you're giving too much praise and recognition in the workplace. If you're doing it right, and nobody does it better than achievers, if you're doing it right, you can't overdo it, because you can't hear I love you too much if people really mean it. Are you with me, Brie?
Yeah.
Okay, because I'm known as the apostle of appreciation. Can I get an amen?
Amen. And what about this notion that like the, younger generations are requiring too much recognition?
Yeah, again, I mean, I'll let Natalie handle this. She's got great data on that. It's not so much the recognition; it's feedback, is what our research shows. And Natalie, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think we can all answer that question for ourselves too, if we just simply speak to what you just shared, Chester, was how do you all feel, right? Like what do you want to receive? And being seen and known and understood, that's something we're really focused on at the Workforce Institute. We have been for some time, but we're really amping up the energy around focus on belonging. And what does it mean to belong? And one of the key ingredients in feeling like I belong here, this is a home, where I work, this is somewhere where I'm known for who I am, I'm respected, appreciated. One of the key contributors is being recognized, not in a general sort of agnostic way, but in a really personal and meaningful way, being seen and being appreciated for who you are and what you do. That is a fundamental human need that we have.
And I think the quote on this slide from Chester says it all. Not to be so semantical, but it's from page 41. We all have a deep-rooted need to know that the work we're doing matters, regardless of our age. It transcends personality, culture, everything.
Yeah, this is Maslow, right? This is Maslow. And this idea that, you know, we talked about in our book, All In, we took a deep dive on culture. We said, well, what is a high performance culture? And it's a place where I believe what I do matters and I make a difference. And when I make a difference, it's noticed and celebrated. You know, in the question box, there's a question there which says, do you think leaders are Scrooges with their recognition because they don't want to spoil their employees? You know, and I hearken back to the great case study in the book, which was the Ford Motor Company. You know, Alan Mulally in the last recession, I mean, he came in and turned that culture around for a culture where recognition was not a part of what you did. Everybody looked out for themselves, sharp elbows, kill or be killed, right? And he said, particularly in a crisis, if you're a Scrooge, he actually used that with your gratitude. You're shooting yourself in the foot. In those times, people need it more than ever. And think about your own personal life. When you're going through tough stuff, you need your family and your partner and your friends to rally around you. That's when it's more critical than anything. And what do they tell you? Hey, you can do this. You know, love what you're doing. Love the effort, you know? And it's so interesting to me that we're spoiling them. How? How is that spoiling them? You know, if you're really specific in your praise, if they're doing a great job, say, well, if I tell them they're doing a great job, it's going to spoil them. No, and here's what's going to happen. They're going to do a better job, right? They're going to say, hey, boss, really appreciate that feedback. I will keep doing that. And that's exactly what you want to have happen, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing that sometimes gets glazed over is that there's a really important distinction between recognition and praise. Nobody, including your younger generations, not one person is asking for unfounded praise. In fact, it can be insulting and actually demotivating if that's given out of context. Recognition should contain specific feedback about a person's performance, while informal praise, while it can be totally nice, it's generic and not specific about what exactly someone did. So that kind of raises the question, Chester. You kind of already talked about the Gallup study of every 7 days, but from your perspective, what's the magic number of how frequent recognition should be?
Yeah, see, this
I
is
know
where
you have a good response.
Yeah. So this is where, as leaders, supervisors, managers, you got to know your team. You got to know your team. You know, we talk about in the book, Billy Lovett. You know, he was a coach. I was mentoring these kids in East Orange, New Jersey. Orange, my favorite color. I know you can't make it up. It was East Orange, New Jersey. And one of the kids was the point guard at the East Orange campus Jaguars, number 3 in your program, but number 1 in your heart, right? So we'd go to the games, and his coach was remarkable. Billy Lovett got more kids from the inner city college scholarships and stuff than anybody I've ever met. So I'm at a game, and one of his players is acting up a little bit. One of his star players. And I wasn't really noticing. I'm a big basketball fan. I wasn't really noticing what was going on. He called a timeout and he grabbed this kid and he started screaming at him. And I went, whoa. He said, sit down. Unless you're willing to play defense, you may never see the floor again. Boom, boom, boom. Another one of his players, 3-point shooter, started missing shots, calls a timeout, comes over, he puts his arm around. He says, hey, buddy, you're off a little bit. Take a breather. I'm going to need you in the 4th quarter. Don't worry about it. So after the game, I went, hey, Coach Lovett, that was not fair. He said, what do you mean? I said, well, you ripped that kid's face off. And then the other kid, you basically gave him milk and cookies and they were both underperforming. And he looked at me with this big smile and he goes, Mr. Elton, I love it when people call me Mr. Elton, know your players. That first kid, if you don't get in his face, he can't hear you. That other kid, if I'd done the same thing, it would have crushed him. So again, back to this frequency, know your team. There are people that love the spotlight. And for them, they are recognition sponges and you can't do it too much. Others like the one-on-one. They don't want to be in the spotlight. You know, they prefer a handwritten note, they prefer a smaller group and so on. So what is the magic number? The magic number is a little different for everybody. And the good leaders take the time to figure that out. And I love the expression, you know, I've got it on my wall in my home office. Know your players. Know your players.
I love that. As the mother of 3 daughters, I feel like I'm on a constant quest to know my players, my N of 3. You know, that data and that perspective around the fact that recognition is a short-term need, I think is one that is important to mention here. Something that, you know, that we know that recognition must be satisfied on an ongoing basis. It's such a critical point. So knowing how your people need to be recognized and knowing that it's really a living and breathing input, and it has a shelf life. And in fact, we've analyzed literally hundreds of recognition programs from around the world. And what's clear is that programs that have experienced the strongest increases in engagement and other positive business outcomes, they average about 1 recognition per employee every 30 days, which is actually our recommended benchmark at the Workforce Institute. But I know that we both agree, Chester, that frequency does not override sincerity. And I know we've touched on this a little bit, but I think it begs repeating that we would never recommend for anybody to arbitrarily go about praising people. I know that you and I both agree that if we're really going to have the intended impact, that recognition has to be authentic and really specific about exactly what that person's behavior was and what those efforts were that need to be recognized. Because when it's real and when it's appropriate, and to your point, when it's customized to the recipient, then that's when we get that hit, right? The stronger the emotional impact will be on that person who's receiving that word, and the stronger the message will be to other people around them, whether it's a team or an organization, about what are the types of behaviors that are most valued inside your organization. He was saying, winning is valued, and how you get there is really dependent on who you are, but that we need to come together around what our values are inside this organization or team.
Yeah, there's some great questions in the Q&A here, and how do you make it peer-to-peer? What are some of the things you can do? We've got a great friend up there in Toronto. Every time I say that, I think I say in Toronto, eh? He's the Bill Manning. He's the president of Toronto FC, and one of the things he does is he knows that as a leader he can't see everything that's going on. So, once a month he brings the whole team together and he, points out the things that they're doing great, areas where we need to improve and so on. And then he's got this really cool award. It's the peer-to-peer award. And it's a gift certificate, to a restaurant or online or whatever it might be. And it's substantial. It's like $200. And he randomly pulls somebody out of the audience and says, who do you want to recognize today? Not who I want to recognize. Which one of your peers has been knocking it out of the park for you? Right? And he said, I knew we'd really broken through when, I called up Sam, and Sam said, I want to recognize Denise for all the stuff she does with our season ticket holders and the whole bit. And Denise comes up and says, I've been waiting 3 months to recognize Scott. And she gave away her award. And he says, at that moment, it's like, we got it. We're making progress. I mean, there are people there that are wanting to be called on, and and during the month, they're storing up these ideas. Who do I want to recognize? Who do I want to appreciate? And when it's peer-to-peer, boy, that's powerful. And to your point, Natalie, he tailored it to his team. His team wanted a voice, so he gave them a voice. Who should get it? Natalie, you're up. Bree, you're up. It was brilliant.
And what really hits me about that, it's like, here are these incredible, contributors sitting there, ain't desperate, really. I mean, I don't feel like that's quite overused when I say that, to recognize. And that speaks to our earlier conversation around, one of the impediments that employees are telling us to recognizing more often is just having a vehicle or having a forum or a stage or simply a tool or whatever it is, just a way to recognize more often. Once in a while, we'll hear the question of it always amazes me, we'll hear a question around what if there's, nothing more to recognize? And I think I don't want to throw anyone under the bus, because I think if you're asking that, I think it's what's necessary is really a mind shift. Because when we know that recognition is powerful and we know that it needs to be specific and personal, and we shift our lens to be looking for opportunities to recognize, there are untold moments and behaviors and to appreciate about others around you.
Yeah. And I just want to add to that, in the executive coaching that we're doing, it's really interesting. We'll say to leaders, look, I love that you go down on the floor. I love that you walk around. I love that you engage with your people. Understand this. You may not remember that interaction. They may never forget it. So are you being the best leader you can be in that moment? Pay attention. Don't take these moments for granted, because when you're the boss and you come down to the floor, people want to know what you're thinking and what you're going to say. And if you're cavalier with it, and so that message is, oh, he or she is just here to check the box. Yeah, I walk the floor. I didn't talk to anybody. I walked the floor. It really is interesting that personalization of recognition. Again, know your players. It's really interesting. I have 4 kids, and they are 4 points in the compass. I mean, I'm sure that we didn't get a couple the right people out of the hospital because they are just so different. Right? Some families, everybody's like the same. Our kids are literally 4 points in the compass, and the way we praise and recognize them is so different. My one son, he loves the details, and he's very analytic. My other son, he's very emotional. Like, and we say, well, what do you want? My daughter, she wants stuff. My youngest son, he wants experiences. And so when we engage with them, it's really interesting. We know they are different. And the use of rewards to motivate employees. I mean, I know you've got some great research on that, and it is really interesting to see what people choose. And it is very much aligns with their values and who they are and their families and their upbringings. It's not just as easy to say, here, we had this one client one time who said, for their 25-year award, they're giving everybody a pewter bowl. And I said, well, that's interesting. How did you arrive at a pewter bowl? And the head of rewards said, well, everybody loves pewter bowls. I went, I did not know that. I did not know that.
What the heck's a pewter bowl? I need to.
Exactly. It's just this bowl, and it looks like it's silver, but it's not, because silver is expensive and pewter isn't. And that's the message. That if we'd given them a silver bowl, they could have at least melted it down. There was some value there.
Well, on the topic of rewards, one of the best chapters in the book addresses the myth that it's all about the Benjamins and pushing rewards. What does the research tell us about the use of rewards to motivate employees in general? Yeah, well, what we always say is, look, it's a great satisfier. It doesn't tend to be a great motivator. And, Natalie, feel free to jump in. I mean, when you get that 3.265% raise that everybody else got, that yippee doesn't last more than 1, maybe 2 paychecks. And then, we actually did the survey and said, what did you spend your last cash bonus on? The number one answer was, I paid bills. So I recognized you so you could pay your electric bill. Yeah, that's not the memory I'm looking for. The second most popular answer was, couldn't remember. There was virtually no impact at all. Natalie, what would you add?
Well, I think, to the point of the dollar, I think that the win here isn't founded in dollars, but to meaningfully acknowledging people for what they do. And so to that question, Brie, like about money, the research shows that differential impact between that non-monetary and monetary recognition, when we look at organizations with the most effective recognition programs, it's clear that, what you're saying, Chester, is right on, that they've caught on to the fact that motivating employees through pushing incentives and intrinsic rewards, it really produces a weak exchange rate with the modern workforce. It, non-monetary recognition, frequent, meaningful recognition overrides this occasional monetary gift or the gold watch all day long. And I think when we remember too that the recognition has a fleeting impact, it reminds us that we need to be focused on acknowledging what's beautiful about what people are bringing to their role and their work and their organization regularly, and that's where the gold is. That's where the benefit lies.
And those are memories. The memories that you, that you remember, right? It makes all the sense in the world. I had a guy that we used to play tennis with. He was a researcher at Merck Pharmaceutical. We were talking about reward and recognition. He said, I got this grandfather clock that they sent me because that's what they send you at 25 years. And he said, and it's nice. I didn't really want a grandfather clock, and yet I've got it, He said, let me show you the greatest recognition I ever got. He pulled out his wallet and he pulled out this dog-eared little note. He said, this was a note given to me on a project I did at Merck 13 years ago. It was the head researcher, and he was a Nobel Prize winner. And all it said was, really appreciate your contributions to the team. You made us all better. Just by being here and creating, I can't thank you enough. And I thought, you got to be kidding me. And he carried it in his wallet for 13 years. That's a memory. right?
It is.
Absolutely. And Natalie, what does our what's our benchmark across our customer base of like the balance of non-monetary to monetary recognition?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think what we see is that the most effective programs have a blended approach. So some monetary recognition with lower reward amounts, but at least 50% of that investment focused on this frequent non-monetary recognition. That's really what we see as that recipe for success.
Yes, a blended approach isn't just good for the wallet. It's also great to drive performance and engagement. Before we close out, I would love to sum up two big takeaways. The first, and maybe one of the most important, is that recognition doesn't work unless it's frequent. And as long as recognition is done correctly, meaning it's following all of the best practices that Chester and Natalie just outlined, with it being specific, timely, transparent, authentic, and all that, more recognition will always equate to stronger performance. But you can't reach optimal levels of recognition frequency without leading with non-monetary recognition and empowering frontline employees to call out the good work that's being done on the front line. Chester, I know that we chatted about this earlier this week, but for our second takeaway, if you had a magic wand and every person in our audience would walk away to implement one thing, what would it be?
I think it comes back to just this sincere appreciation for people that, work with and for you. It's common courtesy. It's the civility that I think we're losing in a lot of our interactions, whether it be, digital or in person, that we actually care about each other. And then lastly, and I love that you put it up, it's my favorite, is take it home. It was so gratifying that all these incredible leaders that we had the privilege to interview and to study in Leading with Gratitude, they all took it home. They all took it home. And what that said to us, Bree, is not only is it a great way to lead, and do we have all the data to prove, as does the Institute that Natalie heads up with such sharp and poignant research, and everybody should read that report because it's got really good stuff in it, right? Is that when you take it home, it's not just a better way to lead, it's a better way to live. We want to be around people that are kind and considerate. Not that they're pushovers. They're not pushovers. It's they appreciate the people around them. I love my family. I would never go 30 days without saying how much I love my family. I would never go 30 days on my team without telling them how remarkable their work is and how much I lean on them and depend on them to make, my life and our work poignant. So yeah, number 2, take it home. Don't leave it at work. Take it home.
I love it. I love that you went there with the last part of the book and how to apply some of these concepts into people's personal lives. There are so many good questions that we don't have time. We kind of covered a lot of them just like in the flow of our conversations, but I know we are coming at time. A few things before we close out. The link in your chat is where you can download all of the Workforce Institute goodies, a copy of Chester's free book, as well as following his amazing gratitude journal. Yes. And so click on that. Natalie, how can people get a pulse on the neat research that you have coming up in the pipeline and all that the Workforce Institute is doing?
Yes, please join us. The best way to get exclusive access to what we think of as the rich and continuous research that we're conducting and sharing is to subscribe to the Workforce Institute. And please also follow me on LinkedIn. I'd love to see you there as well.
And by the way, Bree, I do both of those things. Big fan.
I love it. And Chester, what's the best way people can continue the conversation with you and your team?
Yeah. Follow me and Adrian on LinkedIn. We've got chesterelton.com, our gratitude journal on LinkedIn. You mentioned it already. Wonderful articles. We have guest writers and so on. We have our podcast is there as well. So chesterelton.com or follow me on LinkedIn. Great places to get great resources.
And I do those things too. And Chester provides gems that cause me to have gratitude in my life regularly. So you should definitely follow him. He is the apostle of appreciation.
You guys are such legends. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Steve, buddy, it's back over to you, man. What do we have coming up?
Thank you, Bree and Natalie and Chester. That was a great conversation. You'll all be getting a pewter bowl for your great work. Great idea. In all seriousness, I really like the coach's point about knowing your players, remembering that people are individuals and should be recognized accordingly. That's something that really works at home and at work. So thanks again to our sponsor, Achievers, and to all of you for participating today. If you'd like to join us for more virtual events, you can head to our website, fromday1.co, and check out more of our upcoming webinars and conferences. I'll mention two. Next Tuesday, April 6th, Serendipity, the happy accidents that bring teams together. And next Thursday, April 8th, Employee Stress, how to identify the signs and find new remedies. Thanks again, everyone. Stay well.